clearly this FDA is different than the FDA before January 20th, and the FDA next year is going to be different in light of the aggressiveness of some of these actions.
Hello, I'm Wayne Pines. Welcome to bonus episode 6 of FDA Watch. Thank you for joining us today. We continue to release new bonus episodes to keep you informed about what's happening at FDA during these very interesting times. Today I'll be operating solo as a host for at least a little while. Shelley Garg, who started this podcast with me, has decided to devote full time and attention to her law practice. She did a terrific job, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart for co-hosting this podcast and wish her the best of luck moving forward. We may even have her as a guest. We'll see. The terrific response we've received from hundreds of subscribers to these bonus episodes has further strengthened our commitment to keeping you current on FDA developments. I encourage you to subscribe to FDA Watch if you're not already doing it. It's free. It's a way that you can not miss a single episode. We cover 4 core areas. We cover drugs, devices, foods, and cosmetics. We had a groundbreaking series on AI with the support of the law firm Arnold and Porter. In this bonus episode, we're going to pick the brain of a real industry and FDA veteran. So, I hope that you subscribe and make sure that anybody who's even interested remotely in what FDA does, and that should be every American citizen, because what FDA does affects every American, tunes in. Let's meet today's guest. Our guest is John Taylor. John is head of the quality and compliance practice at ELIQUENT. For more than 30 years, he's been involved with the food and drug community. He held 3 high-profile positions at FDA. He was counselor to the commissioner. He was acting principal deputy commissioner. He was acting deputy commissioner for global regulatory operations and policy. But even more interestingly, at least to me, is that John grew up at FDA. John's father worked at FDA his entire career. When I joined FDA, which unfortunately was many decades ago, my experience was mainly in drugs and devices. And I turned to John's father, who was a specialist in foods, and asked him to regulate me about food regulation. I remember to this day one of his messages, and that is, in terms of safety from harmful pathogens, the safest foods are canned and bottled foods because they've been processed. He advised me at the time, and I've taken this to heart, to avoid raw foods such as shellfish. My family is very upset about that advice because a lot of them eat shellfish, but I will not touch raw shellfish or raw fish in sushi. John, I don't know whether you heard the same messages growing up, but I wanted to begin by asking you what it was like to have a father who was one of the iconic leaders at FDA, and then for you to also serve at the same agency.
Well, Wayne, first of all, thank you for having me. Interestingly enough, at first, it caused me to think of other avenues in terms of my career. I mean, very seldom does one set out to follow one's father, but the truth of the matter is that the more time I spent around him and his colleagues, the more interesting I thought this field was. And the reason I thought it was interesting because it was always evolving. Whether it be a drug, device, food, the science and technology were always evolving. The issues were complex. And, as someone who eventually went to law school, it's one of those areas where you can truly say that you help people on a daily basis, or that your work in of itself has impact. So it was incredibly beneficial in terms of, at the time, gaining broad exposure to some of these issues, even though I did not think I was going to be doing this work full time. It helped me understand, believe it or not, the different programs at FDA. I spent a lot of time in labs. There was one point in time where if you went up to the WEAC, the New England Radiological Lab, you could see my initials carved there when I was a mischievous child. It turned out that I served as the head of the Office of Enforcement. So did my dad. He served as the Associate Commissioner for Regulatory Affairs. I ended up serving in that role. And if you go to the conference room at White Oak, you'll see both our pictures. So it just really immersed me in the field to the point where eventually I realized this is exactly what I want to do when I left law school. And I've cherished every day, and I feel proud to be a part of the FDA community.
Well, all of us who worked with your dad have enormous respect for him, as well as for you. So, an important connection. So let's jump right into the subject here. I just want to ask a very general question to start out. Your overall perspective on what's happening at FDA under the current administration. Just a general overview reaction.
Sure. I guess my initial reaction is unlike some administrations who come on board and are looking to make episodic change, this administration and the leadership of this FDA is currently looking to make transformative change. And so I think one of my initial reactions is that they are putting forth some very bold ideas. Those ideas, in many cases, are at a very high level, and details need to be filled in later in many respects. But clearly, they're looking for transformative change across all the programs within the agency. I think if I picked every center, I could maybe pick one issue for each center where this current group is trying to do something demonstrably different than in the past. And clearly, this FDA is different than the FDA before January 20th. And the FDA next year is going to be different than FDA in light of the aggressiveness of some of these actions.
Yeah, what are the big transformation that you see happening? What are the big
Well, I think
areas?
one in particular is, in terms of looking at the dichotomy between pre-approval and post-approval in the context of medical product approvals. And I think that's both for drugs and devices. And what I mean by that is there clearly is an exploration about how does one handle certain either novel medical technologies or rare diseases? What is the benefit risk profile? And as part of that benefit risk profile, what kind of safeguards do you put, what kind of post-market approaches can be used to maybe help augment that benefit analysis so that in some cases products might be introduced to patients who are in dire need. And part of the safeguards is making sure that from a post-market standpoint, that product is continued being tracked when being used with those patients so that if the benefits aren't realized, another approach can be taken. So there's a certain level of aggressiveness there. I also see it in the context of food. I am one who thinks that the agency has not done a particularly deft job in the past when it comes to explaining that, yes, food is a part of the agency's portfolio, and more importantly, good food and nutrition policy might actually lead more consumers and patients, away from having to take pharmaceuticals or drugs to deal with a condition, or they might not need the intervention of a device if they engage in good preventive care. And I think what this administration and the agency leadership is currently doing is trying to ensure that the food part of the agency is nutrition portfolio, its addressing of outbreaks, its inspection portfolio is done in a way so that the bulwark for the public health platform for the agency starts with nutrition. And that seems very logical, but that's not something the agency often articulates explicitly. And I think this administration is trying to do that and is trying to take follow-up steps to give that real strength and a true foundation within an agency that often is known primarily for its medical products work.
Right. Well, we both saw that there was a cutback in personnel.
Yes.
And a number of people have left. A lot of people retired. As you know, at any point in time, there are a lot of people at FDA who are eligible for retirement. But talk a little bit about how you reacted when you heard that there were cutbacks in personnel at the agency, knowing that the agency is underfunded and personalized, I guess, to begin with.
Sure. So this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. So So, Wayne, as you know, but others might not, I actually spent two stints at FDA. I was at FDA for 15 years, then I went to industry, and then I returned to FDA. And what I learned during my industry stint, which was both at Abbott and at Bio, was, and I knew this before, but it really highlighted the importance of having good people. And the reason that was highlighted for me in the private sector is you're able to hire and fire people a little more aggressively, a little more quickly, and you're able to scale up to meet needs in a way that is difficult to do at FDA. And so when I returned to the agency in 2009, and there was a slew of new legislation that was being passed, one of the things I really focused on was trying to make sure that we had adequate processes in place to bring the people on board who can do all this important work that's expected of us, not only from consumers and patients, but also from Congress, who are since they were the ones who were responsible for promulgating legislation. So when I heard about the cutbacks, one of my initial concerns was, how is the agency going to be able to do not only its current job, but how is it going to be able to do its job in the future when clearly, as you know, being a part of many efforts that have been successful in helping the agency on budgets and resources, there's always new evolving things that the agency is going to have to deal with. So it's not even a question of dealing with today's workload. It's also, how is the agency going to meet the challenges of the future? Rare diseases is one area in particular that's being spoken of. Context of foods across all of the FDA's programs, the most important thing is going to be to have the people available who can do this work. And it's not just the RIFs. There's a lot of attention given to that. But to your point, Wayne, there's been an enormous amount of attrition. There have been workforce actions that occurred before the RIFs in the context of probationary employees. It is unclear to me what the loss of employees from a number standpoint is, but from an overarching concern, I think one of the things that the agency is going to need to do in order to be successful is really take stock of its current workforce needs and look at ways to augment them so that they have the right people available to do the work that they want to do, including some of the transformative work we discussed earlier.
Yeah, as they recruit, I know there have been reservations expressed by the press generally in saying who's going to go to FDA now, given all the transitional stuff. My view has been that, as you said, FDA is such an important agency, and the work is so important to the American public, to public health, that a lot of people will want to work at the agency and try to do that kind of a job. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think the challenge for the agency, Wayne, is that the agency just needs to educate people about its important mission, right? I think that's something that's gotten lost in the discourse. No one's fault. There's just been a lot of talk about other things. But I was ACRA in 2002, not long after 9/11, and we hired 800 people. And we were successful in doing so because people felt a groundswell of support for serving the government and for being a part of a public health mission. And we were able to hire a lot of great people who now are leaders within the agency. And I think that kind of educational effort and that enhanced and intensive discussion about what one can achieve personally and professionally are going to be a couple key steps in terms of hiring. And I also, to be perfectly candid, you also need to get people some type of, and I don't know how to do this, Wayne, but people obviously want some type of assurance that if they do come on board, that they have a place to stay, that they have a place that they can grow into, and that they are not necessarily in peril of losing that position in the short term. Because if so, then that might make them less confident about their ability to build a long career, like many of the successful FDAers that we know.
Let me shift gears for 1 second. Looking at the agency from the standpoint of various regulated industries, and here I want to go down the four industries that we deal with on the podcast: foods, drugs, devices, and cosmetics. What are the most pressing issues that, start out with food industry, that the food industry faces regarding regulatory issues, and how is FDA addressing those concerns?
Yeah, so let me say, I heard Kyle Diamantis speak at a webinar, if you will, for Alliance for Stronger FDA, and I was impressed by some of the priorities that he outlined. I think for foods, one of the most pressing.
Just for the record, I just want to clarify that the person that John is talking about is the new deputy commissioner for foods. He's the new food czar. I just wanted to make that clear. People might not know his name.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for that. So Wayne, as you know, I was part of a Reagan-Udall group that provided some recommendations in the wake of the infant formula um, crisis to help improve the regulation of food at FDA. And me and my colleagues presented. It was led by former Commissioner Dr. Haney. We presented uh, recommendations to Dr. Califf and Dr. Woodcock, and they worked to institute some of those reforms. And actually, that effort spread to all the centers, but I'm just going to stay with food for right now. And it included a combination, Wayne, of policy changes, organizational changes, and operational changes. And right now, what the food program appears to be doing is implementing many of those changes. They have looked to improve the organizational aspects of the program. They are looking at reforms that would improve the program's work with the states. Most people don't know this, but the states do a majority of the food inspections on behalf of the agency. Um, there are some who thought that program had weakened over the years, so the administration's working to strengthen that. We've seen their work in terms of dyes and in terms of uh, food ingredients. So I think one of the things that they are absolutely pursuing is this wholesale change that addresses food holistically from the standpoint of nutrition all the way through to dealing with the potential of pathogens in food, and doing so in a way that modernizes the management structure to meet today's needs. One of the criticisms in the past was that the management structure in the past, and this is not something that's a fault of anyone, just was no longer necessarily sufficient to meet some of today's challenges in the food world. And so the fact that the leadership is moving ahead with that, as well as looking at some of the nutrition um, ideas when it comes to kids, I think is obviously a top priority, and something that's going to be important as we move forward in dealing with the foods program.
How do you react to their comments about what they call, they're trying to define it, ultra processed
Yes.
foods? I remember talking to your dad, and he said he didn't use the word ultra processed, but he said if it's in a can or a jar, from a pathogen standpoint, it's safe because the canning process and the bottling process in the country works. But he didn't talk about the nutritional aspect of it, and again, that's a new area for FDA. But talk a little bit about ultra processed foods and how you view what the administration is doing on that.
Yeah, so I think the larger point, Wayne, is that nutrition has been lost in the mix for many, many years. I think that was one of the top issues that arose when, as part of the Reagan-Udall group, we were doing stakeholder meetings and we were talking to industry and patient groups and even folks at the agency. And so this emphasis on nutrition, I think, is a an important one. And at least from my vantage point, the fact that it's being viewed both from a policy standpoint and an operational standpoint, and possibly from the standpoint of strengthening the working relationship with the states, provides an important foundation when it comes to the FDA's public health mission. As I said before, we tend to jump to here's what a drug can do, here's what a device can do, here's what a biologist can do. And that's all great and positive, but we tend to skip past the preventive nature of nutrition and what it can do to maybe make some of those other products less necessary as part of enhancing our health. In terms of ultra processed foods, I think my dad's answer was a good one, but obviously, Wayne, one of the things that's so different is that the processing of food has changed a great deal. Like there's a certain level of complexity that exists that didn't exist in the past. And so I think, looking at this issue anew, which is something that I think has shown up in various documents, very Maha documents. There was an article that the commissioner wrote, I think, for JAMA, that was in there as well. So I think looking at all this anew is appropriate, and will provide a good foundation for how we should regulate these products or these foods in the future.
Let's shift over to drugs. So, Dr. Makari, obviously the physician, the surgeon, and he has spoken, I think, more about uh, uh, drug issues than anything else. Again, your general impression as to what industry needs to focus on in terms of the way that FDA is managing the regulation of drugs.
Yeah, so I think in the drug space, so I think one of the things that's interesting. Well, there's several things that are interesting. One is that Commissioner Bakari in the drug space has had several forums where he sat down and he's met with senior managers within the drug industry, and there have been some readouts, and I think one of the interesting things is that from the agency standpoint, it's gone well enough that they've actually added, I believe, another forum, which will be in Raleigh, which is an important area of research and development manufacture in September. So one of the things that's going on is he is going directly to industry and trying to glean from industry things that the agency could do differently. I think as part of that, there's probably, the backdrop of that is obviously there's a belief on the part of the administration that there are things that industry can do differently. One of the interesting issues in regards to drugs is the transparency issue. For those of you who don't know, complete response letters are letters that are sent to outline things that need to be addressed or improved before a drug reaches final approval. Technically, in the past, they have only been made public after a drug has been approved. There are some legal issues surrounding confidentiality when it comes to trade secret and confidential commercial information. But one of the things that the commissioner and the agency have pledged to do is look at whether there are avenues that allow for those complete response letters to be issued prior to a product being approved. And the rationale behind that is if others who are developing drugs can benefit from the insights of those complete response letters, then maybe it will help others waste less time going down a path to nowhere when it comes to engaging in research development. It might provide additional and creative ideas in terms of how to construct clinical trials. It might provide interesting ideas and new ideas regarding how to handle certain quality issues. I think that the bottom line is that the transparency, I think, from the perspective of leadership is important because it might actually lead to more efficient process for introducing drugs to consumers and patients, which has the benefit of also, in some cases, leading to more affordable drugs being provided to patients. So those are a couple things going. The other thing that's going on, and I'm a compliance person, Wayne, as you know, I find it interesting that the administration is really engaging on on a couple issues. One is inspections, right? One of the things that the agency has talked about is going back to unannounced inspections in the context of foreign inspections. When I was at the agency and I was deputy commissioner, one of my mantras was a need to ensure that there was a level regulatory playing field between domestic manufacturers and foreign manufacturers. Unannounced inspections are not a panacea, but they are another tool that the agency can use to achieve that goal so that inspections that are being conducted all around the world have the same level of rigor in order to ensure that U.S. patients and consumers have access to high quality products. That's an area, but to do that, Wayne, you also need to strengthen the foreign offices so that you can do these unannounced inspections. And there has been some, I believe, discussion about doing that. So that's an interesting part of the drug puzzle. The other part of it is the things that both the administration and the agency are doing to try and bring manufacturing back to the United States. I think that also is very interesting. Onshoring is euphemistically how it's described, but in a very plain way, what it means is taking manufacturing that over the last 20 years has traditionally migrated to other parts of the world and bringing it back to the United States, which would have the benefit of shortening complex supply lines. Also has the benefit, for employment in terms of providing high-paying technical jobs. But it also has the ability of allowing the agency to make sure that they have a greater handle on drugs that might be prone to shortages by having these products manufactured here. It means sensitive drugs are manufactured within the contiguous 48 states in a way that is secure and safe, and we're not dependent on other countries. So that's another area that I think within drugs is pretty interesting to observe.
Yeah, what's your reaction to this voucher program that the commissioner has proposed? Now they're starting to identify what kind of information needs to be submitted in order to get a voucher. How do you react to that?
Yeah, so so back to my earlier answer about transformative. This is sort of an example of something that's quite transformative, right? I think it's interesting. I don't obviously, like all of us, I'm waiting for more details when it comes to trying to understand every facet of it. But just taken at its face value, clearly one of the main goals is to reduce the amount of time it takes to bring a drug to market. And so the question is, the nuts and bolts, I think, of that program are threefold. One is clearly understanding the criteria that the agency is going to use in terms of the vouchers. And there have been obviously a discussion generally of the program's benefits: faster review times, enhanced communication throughout the review process, having a multidisciplinary team-based evaluation, all clearly with an idea of moving things along. And then there's also discussion of the priorities, which is being able to deliver more innovative cures, being able to address unmet medical need, being able to increase affordability. So these are incredible goals, incredible priorities. I think the key is really the devil's in the details, Wayne, to your point. I mean, I look forward to learning more about the decision-making process, the criteria that's used to measure whether or not an idea is brought to the agency, meets the ultimate criteria. And so I think, like many others, I'm waiting with bated breath to get more information, because it also affects, the onshoring issue, because one of the priorities here is hopefully from the standpoint of the commissioners to advance the health interests of Americas by, again, bringing more of this manufacturing back to the United States so that you can ensure that supply chains are stronger and that the quality of products are of a requisite level. So I think it's an interesting idea. Look forward to more details. Wayne, I also think one of the things that is important that's been outlined in the context of the program, and this has to happen as part of the final implementation, is that there's been an emphasis on the fact that this program is still meant to maintain FDA's rigorous safety and efficacy standards. I think when it was first announced, I think some people assumed that, well, somehow this would be the standard being driven downward. Each time the agency has released information about this potential program, there's been an emphasis on the fact that this approval standard is not going to change. And so I think that will be something that's important to preserve as we move forward with this idea.
Yeah, let me ask you to now shift gears a little bit to devices.
Okay.
Impression about what's going on and what does the industry need to focus on?
So my impression, and hope it's not wrong, Wayne, is that there's been a certain amount of stability in the device world. We have not, In the quality space, one of the things that's been interesting is from a priority standpoint, we've heard the center talk about the importance of policies around home care. There's been discussion about the continued fostering of AI. Um, there's been continuing discussions and policymaking regarding the importance of software in the context of devices. There have been just recently a new guidance on the importance of cybersecurity. And in my world, the quality world, one of the big um, priorities for the center is the implementation of the quality management system regulation. So for those of you who don't know what that is, it's essentially the set of quality and control regulations that apply to devices. There have been previous to now two other iterations. This is the third iteration and puts a big premium on managing risk. And it is going to be fully effective at the beginning of 2026. What the agency has done is it actually announced an effective date, but then it's given industry a grace period where the agency has exercised enforcement discretion as the industry attempts to implement these new processes, procedures in accordance with this new regulation. That is something that the center has stuck to. There's no change in timeline there. So I think that's exciting as well. I think the other thing that's been interesting is that even though there has been essentially attrition across all the centers, there are, Michelle Tarver, the leader of Cedar H, has been there throughout and, appears to be providing, the same level-headed leadership that he's provided in the past. And I think that's one of the reasons, at least from our vantage point, we just see a continuation of some of the important things that the center has been embarking on. What we've seen is continuation of those efforts as opposed to diverging into different other areas that at this point might not have the same public health importance.
We're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, I'm going to ask John to talk about cosmetics and what's going on in that area, and also about AI and how that might be integrated into the various systems at FDA. We'll be right back. And we're back. We're talking with John Taylor, head of the quality and compliance practice at ELIQUENT, former senior official for many, many years at FDA, has great insights into what's going on across all of the product categories. So John, just to kick off the second part of this interview, I want to ask you the same question about cosmetics that you've already addressed about foods, drugs, and devices. What should the industry be focused on from an FDA regulatory standpoint?
Yeah. So the cosmetic space is very exciting for a couple of reasons. One is because there is major legislation about 19, 20 months ago meant to modernize the regulation of cosmetics at the agency. And then, in addition to that, there were organizational changes in regards to where cosmetics was housed within the agency. So those are two big seminal results, two seminal actions in regards to the regulation of cosmetics. But when it comes down to sort of the more nitty gritty things that industry should be aware of, I think one of them is the implementation of this legislation. So the legislation does many things. I won't go down a rabbit hole, but in some ways, what it does is it attempts to take the regulation of cosmetics and makes that regulation similar to how other FDA products are regulated. So one of the things that the legislation is calling for is the establishment of good manufacturing practice regulations, i.e., good quality control regulations that cosmetic manufacturers would need to abide by as part of manufacturing and processing their products. These regulations exist in the context of other programs. I noted them a second ago in the context of devices. The agency is behind on the implementation of that. One of the reasons is because as important as cosmetics are, from a funding standpoint, they've suffered a little bit. And so I think they're trying to do a lot of things with but there's a need for more resources to drive some things forward. One of the areas in particular that has moved forward is testing from a toxicological standpoint. One of the mechanisms that the commissioner has used to communicate with stakeholders has been these. I'm not really sure the right way to describe them. They're almost like mini town hall meetings. But one of the meetings focused on talc in the context of cosmetics, and that meeting was used to sort of highlight some of the agency's future plans when it comes to strengthening the regulation of cosmetics, and testing was one component of that. I think when it's all said and done, what would be interesting about cosmetics is that you'll have a program that is stronger and more robust than in the past. And again, that's not a criticism. In the past, the cosmetic program was woefully underfunded and could not hire a lot of people. Here's an opportunity for it to become strengthened in a way that allows it to really focus on preventive aspects of cosmetic regulation, as opposed to in the past, in some cases, only being able to deal with the situation after there's a problem, which is a more reactive approach. So I think, to me, what's so important is to follow both the organizational changes, focus on hiring a new leadership, and then third is focus on the broad implementation of the new cosmetic legislation. There's different facets to it, but as you follow each one, once you get to the end, I think you'll have a sort of more robust regulatory program that in many ways is akin to some of the regulatory programs that are already in existence at the agency.
Right, and we've covered cosmetics and the new legislation on our podcast because I agree with you 100%. It's an important development, and the industry is going to need to comply, and the FDA is going to need to implement it. And you're 100% correct also in saying that cosmetics has historically been underfunded. There's only so much money, and there's so much to do at the agency.
Yeah, and Wayne, can I mention one other thing? Because
Sure.
you're undoubtedly familiar with this. One of the things that's interesting about cosmetics too is that the businesses are very heterogeneous in terms of sizes, right? So you can have very small cosmetic companies, and then you can have very big ones. And so I think one of the challenges for the agency is making sure that they're able to right size that regulation in a way that addresses, the lack of uniformity across that particular industry. And that sounds easy, but I think it's something that's going to require a lot of thought in order to ensure that these regulations are actually accessible to all who work in this space.
I want to shift gears again and talk about AI. FDA both regulates AI as well as uses AI as part of its own evaluation program. So again, I'm going to make a question general. How do you view the FDA's use of AI and then its regulation of AI?
Yeah, so I believe it was May when the agency announced ELSA, the application of AI within the agency, and the I think what the agency was careful in doing was outlining, a foundational step, and then prognosticating on the progress that they hope to make in the future that will allow the broader application of AI in the context of reviewing documents. Obviously, part of that is potentially the product approval phase. I also think, by the way, this doesn't get as much attention, but I also think internally there are AI tools that the agency could probably use to help foster its regulation of quality and manufacturing across all industry segments. And lastly, I can't believe that there isn't a way, and I am by the means no expert here, but just this, thinking grandly, that there isn't a way to use AI to better understand the different products that are coming across our borders and using it to continue to enhance our ability to make risk-based determinations as to what products should come in, which products should be stopped, what inspections should be focused on, which can probably which inspections could be put off. All those things I think the agency is obviously working on, and I look forward to seeing the progress they make, all with an idea towards also making them both efficient from a workforce standpoint, but also just being more efficient in terms of handling the huge amount of data that comes before the agency on a daily basis. So that's my thoughts about inside the agency. In terms of the agency's regulatory application, Wayne, I feel like the Center for Devices got things started with the regulation of AI, and then obviously the pharmaceutical centers followed suit. At least from an outside perspective, at one point it looked like that there were sort of different paths being taken across the medical product space, but over time you're starting to see common themes emerge from the agency in regards to its regulation of AI, which I think is helpful. I think this is one of those issues, Wayne, where communication with the outside world is going to be important, but that the communication needs to be two ways. I think one of the things the agency obviously will benefit from is learning from industry and other stakeholders what their plans are for AI, so that as the agency decides how to regulate this in the future, they're doing so not just with an eye towards the present, but also with an eye towards the future. And there are undoubtedly insights that the outside world has that will be helpful to the agency. So I'm hoping that there is going to be continued. And on top of that, I know that there are other ideas that the Commissioner administration have in regards to AI, but I'm not necessarily as privy to those from a regulatory standpoint. Mostly I'm dealing with what the agency has done so far as of today, and base my answer on past discussions, speeches, and pronouncements regarding how they view AI regulation in the future when it comes to FDA's regulated industries.
And one final question to you as we wrap up. What do you hope to see the agency focus on for the rest of this year and into next year? Where should their priorities be?
I think I have my answer has three components. First priority, I think, has to be shoring up the workforce, Wayne. As we discussed earlier, and as I learned when I was at the agency, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't have good people there who can work on those issues, ideas, and focus on their implementation, you're going to fall short. So I think both for purposes of improving morale, but also for purpose of attracting new employees to the agency, I think priority one needs to be to shore up the workforce. I think priority two is there has been a lot of discussion, as I said before. I think some of the ideas are undoubtedly transformative. There's been a lot of different policy issues bandied about. But I think the second issue that needs to be worked on is continuing to enhance communication with the various FDA stakeholders. I think it's great that the pharmaceutical CAOs had an opportunity, had those specific forums to interact with the commissioner. But there are sort of more mundane approaches that I think need to be used in order to communicate with, like making sure, I know we're sort of in a deregulatory state, but I think regulations and guidances are still important in terms of helping industry and other FDA stakeholders, whether they be patients, consumers, whatever, understand the agency's expectations, especially when it comes to new ideas, right? So using the voucher idea as an example, continuing to strengthen the agency's ability to communicate these new ideas and giving the agency ability to provide feedback, I think, is the second important thing. I think the third important thing is, and this is different from shoring up the workforce. This is shoring up your senior leadership, making sure that you have the people. The commissioner gets to pick his leadership team. There are still some holes to fill. I think by doing so, one, take some pressure off the commissioner who can't do everything. It's an enormously complex job. But also, two, what it does is it provides permanent officials that people can look to when they have questions and issues. And it just provides a certain level, I think, of predictability and stability that, again, enhance the agency's ability to do its job and enhance the ability of its stakeholders to respond to those things that the agency is thinking. So those are three things off the top of my head. Lastly, four is the agency being able to move ahead with user fees. I know there's a lot involved in the discussion of user fees, the pros and cons, but the bottom line is I don't see Congress appropriating enough money to fund the agency's various functions. So I'm hoping number 4 is that the agency is able to move in earnest in support of user fee negotiations so that the next reauthorization occurs in a timely manner and without a hitch.
Yeah, it looks like they're heading in that direction. It's been good to hear, the senior leadership committed to user fees. That was not so certain when, 6 months ago.
That's right. And they're starting to have the public meetings, Wayne, to your point. Like, I think the device one might have been yesterday. Maybe it's today, but anyway, you're right.
Yeah, no, they're clearly moving ahead, and that's good news because I'm 100% in agreement with you. The Congress will not be inclined to appropriate whatever FDA needs in order to really fulfill its mission. Okay, that's a good place to end. John, thank you so much for being on this podcast. You were a terrific guest. Thanks to our podcast creator and producer, Michael Evan Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. I just want to mention to our listeners that if you want to suggest or be a guest on the show, or if you want to be a marketing partner or a sponsor, or just comment, you can contact us. Our address is info at fdawatch.net. That's fdawatch.net. And definitely check out our website. If you are so inclined to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really does make a difference. And remember to make sure that you and everybody you ever met subscribes. It's free, and it's the only way to make sure you won't miss a single episode of FDA Watch. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch.